You're on mute, Dom.
Rito already saving me. I appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who joined today. Appreciate folks taking the time out of the day for this conversation. One quick plug before we get started, as you all can see on the screen, we have our last event of this season next week on Tuesday, December 6th at noon, where our very own Alex Seaskin will be sharing, kind of putting together some thinking and work and a couple of op-eds that he's written in the past few years around this concept of opportunities to make Chicago colleges and high schools less selective. So if you're available, would love for you all to be able to join. I think we just dropped a link in the chat. So with that, let me jump in. I want to start just with a bit of context about why we're here today. So I think, as we all know, across the Chicago education landscape, the racial reckoning that our country experienced in 2020 renewed opportunities for many organizations and institutions to deeply interrogate conditions that they create for young people of color and the effects that their power, privilege, and positionalities have on communities that they serve. We at the To and Through Project were no different and have spent the past few years working to center our commitment to racial equity in our mission of creating equitable education systems for Chicago public school students by helping educators use data for inquiry and action. This journey for us has really fundamentally impacted who we are as a team, how we articulate the stories we tell through our data, how we aim to disrupt the legacy and impact of white supremacy in our work, and reimagine our approach to and opportunities for impact. Most recently, this work has culminated in the sharing of our first To and Through Team Equity Stance, which is our collective commitment to how we want to show up in this work, the tensions that we continue to address, and an articulation of the work that we still need to do. This documented stance, which we publish on our website on Tuesday, we think represents our best understanding of where we are currently as a team. And we see this stance as a tool that we can use to hold ourselves accountable, and one that we hope to update as we continue to transform or continue our transformation into an anti-racist organization in pursuit of helping young people achieve their dreams. We are incredibly proud of this work that we've accomplished, and I would also be remiss if I did not acknowledge the critical guidance and support that we received from who we call our big cousins down the street at the Network for College Success here at the university. So really appreciate the guidance and modeling that they've provided to us. But at the same time, we also recognize that we still have a tremendous amount of work ahead of us. And I think this context provides a genesis behind the conversation today. We're hoping to have a conversation that's about, how we as organizations and individuals can continue not to just start, but sustain, reimagine, and sharpen our commitments to building better systems that meet the needs of students and communities that we aim to serve. We've invited two leaders here that have inspired us and countless other leaders throughout the city of Chicago on how we can harness the power of healing, reflection, and community to affect the conditions that we create for young people, particularly Black, Brown, and Indigenous youth, to thrive. I want to acknowledge that we all here on this call may be coming from different perspectives and backgrounds for today's conversation. One of the biggest learnings for us as a team is that there is no playbook in this work. This is people work. This is heart work. And so, we are coming to this conversation today, not necessarily in search of answers, but to take advantage of this opportunity to reflect on our own journey and each of our own individual opportunities for leadership in our organization. For you as an audience, I would like to offer a similar invitation for reflection as we engage in the discussion today. One of my personal favorite parts of our work here at To and Through is that we get this opportunity to interact with so many of the disparate parts of the public education system here in Chicago. On this call, I'm looking at it, we have educators, researchers, members of the nonprofit and philanthropic community, district, government, community leaders. And in many ways, all of us on this call make up a portion of the system that we aim to change. And so I'd like to invite you, along with our panelists, would like to invite you to join us in exploring how each of us can individually and collectively continue to make decisions every single day that works towards building a more equitable and just system that truly meets the needs of our young people. So with that, a few logistics. In a moment, we're going to be joined by our amazing panelists. We will be holding some time for Q&A at the end of our discussion, so please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I also want to share that something that we've been doing with all of our presentations this year is trying to hold, we are holding some time, we're calling the post-panel discussions. And these are optional spaces for you as audience members to join us in collectively processing some of what we've heard here today. So if you RSVP'd for this event, you should have a calendar invite for the separate Zoom room for the post-panel discussion. If not, we'll be sharing a link to that at the end of our conversation today, if you're interested in joining. All right, let's get to the folks that you all came here to see. I will do some brief intros to jump in. And first up, I would like to introduce Jacquelyn Lemon. From the classroom to administration and beyond, Jacquelyn Lemon has built a career as an educator and leader. Most recently, Jackie spent more than 12 years working for UChicago's Network for College Success, where she served for the last 4 of those years as the co-executive director tasked with implementing and monitoring success. In that role, she honed her talents as a motivator who holds herself and her teams accountable to actualize their espoused values in the relentless pursuit of impact and measurable results. With that experience in hand, Jackie's career recently hit its apex when she returned to NewRoot, formerly Emoja, to serve as its chief executive officer. This professional milestone, in fact, represents a full circle moment due to the fact that as a high school principal, Jackie's school partnered with Emoja, developing a relationship with the organization that clearly has had a lasting impact. Throughout her leadership trajectory, Jackie has remained committed to her roots of honoring restoration, justice, and love. She is now focused on honoring NewRoot's past while crafting a reimagined future. Welcome, Jackie. Great to see you. And next up, we have Rito Martinez. Rito Martinez is a longtime educator and coach committed to the transformation of urban public education and youth-serving organizations. Through his work, Rito focuses on elevating leaders, aligning and transforming their practices and outcomes in partnership with the young people and communities they serve. Since serving as the founding principal of Social Justice High School in Chicago Public Schools, Rito has held a variety of positions focused on leadership development, including serving as vice president of national programs for the Surge Institute. Currently, along with his independent business, Rito Martinez, Executive Leadership Coaching and Consulting, had to get that plug in. Rito is also the co-founder of the Truth, Healing, and Equity, or THE Fellowship, a 10-month leadership program for organizational teams focused on transformation through the necessity of racial healing, adaptive leadership, and racial equity policy implementation. Welcome, Rito. I've had the pleasure of being able to witness firsthand and learn from the leadership of both these amazing people over the years. And I honestly cannot tell you all how excited I am to be able to be joined with them in conversation today. So welcome, you two. Thank you for your time. Good to see you. And let's jump in. So we're going to start, we had the opportunity to kind of talk but before this, and I think one thing I'd like to start on is, this concept I think is existed a lot in our space around the conversation of, some say that, equity has become kind of a mainstream topic. It's talked about by every type of organization, every type of leader. And so would love to just start off by hearing, what do you see as some of the implications of this having, particularly in our space, and how is it potentially diluted the work of transforming outcomes for young people? And also how, are there any opportunities that you've seen kind of created with this transition? Anybody?
Two implications Thank you, Dom. First of all, honored to be here and absolutely honored to be with my buddy Rito. Two implications for me. I am one of those people who agree, and I think the topic of equity has, unfortunately, in some sectors, in some ways, become trendy. And I think that results in two things. I think there are people and organizations now who want to be a part of the trend and check the box. And unfortunately, that can come off as performative work, which is harmful and damaging. And is not really producing any results. On the flip side of that, there's also an implication that now there's at least a national dialogue about equity. And so I think to our advantage, it's not as hard to enter into some spaces, I think, as it was 8 years ago, 5 years ago, because so many people are having the conversation.
Yeah, it's a great question. Before we start, I wanted to just acknowledge the fact that we are gathered together on this day on stolen land, built on stolen labor, and invite us to reflect and think about how we could be in right relationship to this land and to the original inhabitants. I also hope that our conversation pleases our ancestors, and we invite them in also, and invite all of us to not only engage with our intellect, but engage with our bodies, our hearts, and our souls, as we sort of dialogue and think about the implications of our work around this word of equity. And it's an honor and privilege to be here with all of you, and also with Jackie, who I've learned so much from, and is a dear, dear friend. So I think the push, I think to not sort of anesthetize the word equity, I think we have to be really explicit in terms of what are we actually trying to do. And so I would want to invite all of us to think about, to really assert and stand solidly that when we talk about equity, we must include the racial element of it. It has to be racial equity, because then it brings to the forefront what we're talking about. We're talking about anti-Blackness, anti-racism, and their implications both systemically, organizationally, individually, and collectively when we push ourselves into defining broadly and boldly what we mean about equity. It should be racial equity. It shouldn't be equity. It should always be racial equity. And then I would also invite us to think about adding racial justice, so that we could look at the elements of our programs and the elements of policies and practices. And then we should also add racial healing, because we can't do none of this work around racial justice or racial equity if we are not also intentionally engaging around these concepts of racial healing, both individually, collectively, interpersonally with one another as well. So I think the way to sort of not make equity either something that's popular or trendy is to really push and double down on what we mean and clarify what this work can look like around racial equity, racial justice, and racial healing.
And Rito, when we talk about racial healing, equity, and justice, we have to talk about actions, new ways of being, new ways of talking, new ways of thinking, and new ways of acting and showing up. And that takes the performative aspect out of it. That takes it's a program and we only have to do one session of professional development and check the box that this is a long, difficult, challenging process.
Absolutely. I love that. I think we're working towards, I think, being clear about what we're trying to talk about, right? And Rito, I appreciate you brought up this notion of racial healing. I think to continue to kind of level set today, would love for you to just share a little bit about what you see. I know it's been central in a lot of your work. What do you see as some of the differences between addressing issues of racial equity and engaging in racial healing work. And then potentially what have been some of the challenges you've seen teams have in kind of making that transition?
Yeah, I think like I'd love sort of unpacking the connection between or unpacking a little bit this element of racial healing. I think racial healing should be embedded in our organizational culture. A lot of organizations are beginning to move towards racial affinity work. We need racial affinity spaces to support our own journeys and impact and how we've internalized, colonialism, imperialism, white supremacy ourselves, right? There are, Sonia Nieto terms this framework around agent and target, and we are both in white supremacy structures. And I think doing that work with ourselves in racial affinity is critical. I think it's racial healing has to happen in collective community care structures with that level of intentionality. The other aspect of racial healing that's critical, that connects back to racial equity, is that racial healing can also happen in the disruption and accountability of the systems that are causing harm. Because it doesn't make sense that we could perpetually be in racial healing for eternity if we are never actually addressing the institutions and systems and conditions that are actually causing harm. And our ability to mobilize and act towards these institutions, towards these systems, and even recreate new systems is part of how we must actionalize racial healing, because there's a duality to them. And we also find healing in our abilities to disrupt and actually really disrupt and create new systems. And that process within itself can also expand our experience of healing. And so that's the duality that I would love for us to invite us to imagine and think about what that may look like, both with the work that our students are doing and with the work that we are doing in our organizations. Quick anecdote, when I was a principal at Social Justice, and we had the enormity of bringing in students from North Lawndale into Little Village and all the racial tensions that actually happened. Our students experienced racial healing when they came together themselves and began to address some of these issues together. And in that activism and in their ability to disrupt and change some of those systems, as simple as demanding the CTA to extend the bus route to protect African-American students coming through the neighborhood, that simple action and that win really did a lot for students understanding and connecting with one another and building those opportunities for racial healing with one another. So it can be done, and it must be central to the systems and cultures that we're creating.
Love that. Thank you. I think as we think about putting some of these concepts into action, Jackie, as a leader who recently joined a new organization, would love to just hear a bit about, what are some of the things that you have been paying attention to or you've been looking for to understand some of the work that is needed to happen for your teams?
I'm going to answer that and piggyback on a little bit the second part of that first question. When you asked about obstacles to racial healing,
Yes.
I'm going to combine that with what I'm looking for. I agree, the healing work needs to happen individually, in affinity, and across difference. And what I'm getting ready to say may sound harsh, but I think it's important for leaders to hear this. One of the obstacles when you're doing racial healing work is that there can be an expectation from your teams or from folks that you work with that you are to heal them, that you are the healer, that it is your job to make them feel better and to fix the trauma. And I just want to bring that into the conversation because as leaders, one, it's lonely, hard work. As leaders of color, that is absolutely magnified, especially when doing racial healing work. You have to be careful not to take on too much so that what we can do as leaders is set conditions for the healing work, but I will not own being the healer. I can hold spaces for work in affinity. I can refer people to the employee assistance program when we're having tough conversations. I can encourage people to seek out their own therapy, to do their own personal work, but I can't fix it for folks. So that's a trap people have to be aware of. For me, it's important when being on this journey that there is common language and that everyone in the organization, no matter the role, is involved in this work. I define equity, my short definition of equity is equal and excellent outputs with differentiated and disruptive inputs. And so this equity journey looks challenging, it looks unequal, it is painful and joyous. And so what it requires and what I'm looking for is a commitment from folks to stick to it, even if you don't know what you're getting to in the beginning. There has to be a commitment to the work that shows up financially in your budget. It has to show up in human resources in the way that you onboard people. It has to show up in spaces that aren't just set aside for equity conversations. And it requires a lot of resiliency.
Yeah. Love that. Thank you. Let's talk about that, right? I think all of us have used this term journey. And I think it is important to know, I think from our perspective, that's been one of our biggest collective learnings is that I think we had a breakthrough when we stopped looking for a finite destination and just embrace the process that we are continuing to go through. And with that, like you said, Jackie, this is hard work, right? This is emotional work. And so would love to just hear some of your thoughts on kind of, again, this central question of what is necessary to be able to sustain the energy, to sustain the focus of teams that are really trying to center racial equity, racial healing, and racial justice work.
For me, me as the leader, there has to be a commitment for me to do my own work. And for me, I don't know about others, that starts with getting really clear about who I am. And that is a lifelong journey. Great sages and teachers have talked about the importance of knowing thyself. So I would say before entering this work, there has to be a lot of work around identity and self-identity and mirror work. And that requires a lot of unlearning of who I've been told I am, who this country says I am, who even my family says I am. And so when you do that deep level of identity work and unlearning, and you're able to stand with conviction on who you are, I think you're better equipped to enter this work. I would say another thing is setting boundaries. I am not a martyr. I'm not trying to kill myself. I cannot take up every cause in the country, every cause in the universe. And so there are times where I have disrupted the staff where I feel like, well, let me back up and say, when you're doing adaptive work, right? We talked about head and heart work and adaptive work. As a leader, you've got to know when to turn the temperature up, to create some provocations, make the organization uncomfortable, You got to know when to turn down the heat, when there's a little bit too much going on and there has to be some care and some love and some healing. But as the leader, you can't always be the one provoking. You can't always be the one modeling. And so you've got to build a coalition of the willing. There's got to be other folks in it with you. And you've got to be patient. You've got to meet folks where they are and stick to it without being abused, because there are some people who just aren't ready. You have to have conversations and take actions to either staff who aren't ready or partner organization schools who aren't ready, so that the work can get moved forward. Because what you don't want to create is a situation where you've triggered traumas and those folks are being disruptive to the end goal of what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's extremely, those invitations are extremely important, right, for us to consider, that Jack is asking us to reflect on. I think the role of leadership is critical. I think sustainability is absolutely necessary. I think one of the mottos that I coach so many leaders around is never do this work at the expense of your own well-being. Or like in my 20 years of working directly with students in community, not once did a young person or a family or a mother ever say, Mr. Martinez, we want you to work and harm yourself in the process because that's what we expect of you. Never once did anybody ever say that to me. In fact, it was the opposite. They have always shown so much grace and love in that journey. And so this notion of doing this work at the expense of our own well-being as validation of doing real work or legitimate equity work or social justice work is something that the system itself has created to undermine and not make this work sustainable and not make this work joyous. So I think those invitations are absolutely critical. I think what's really hard, right, is to create a culture, like you said, Dom, a culture where it's not about the outcome, it's not about completion, it's not about are we doing this right, or is there a framework that we could follow? It's the ability to really understand how to embrace the unknown, how to embrace the fact that the context that each organization, each individual who's in this webinar today, their contexts are so unique that the collective community of those individuals in that organization have the ability to create and understand the process of emergence and embrace the journey of that emergence, right? And that is so hard to do, right? That is so hard to do. And so the invitation is to embrace the journey and the process, knowing that we have everything that we need to create those conditions for justice and racial healing and racial equity and love in this work, and really embracing that and learning to call in, radical reimagination of what we're doing, right? Like really beckon and call in the work of Adrienne Marie Brown in terms of really understanding what it takes to sort of radically reimagine and redesign these systems and these conditions towards racial justice and racial healing and love. And it's beautiful, right? It could be absolutely beautiful, but it's the antithesis to the way that a lot of our organizations are created, the way that philanthropy also demands in terms of outcomes. And a lot of times the ways that our education systems are actually, modeled after in terms of those outcomes. And so that's what's difficult, right? Is to be able to navigate both of those conditions.
I love that. I think something that makes me think about, just in reflecting on our journey, is that I think another barrier along that has been, our ability to make mistakes as well along the way, and the creating space to be able to make mistakes that I think in some ways have been really critical for our growth. And so would you all talk a little bit about, I don't know how to exactly phrase this, but, what do you see, it is not a linear pathway, and what do you see as the opportunities, if you are a part of an organization that does have, an event that potentially does feel like maybe you are backtracking on some of your growth, what are the opportunities to use that as a leader? Does that make sense?
Oh, you will backtrack if you're doing this work. That will happen. You will take steps backwards. You will make mistakes. And so I think it's important for us to hold space for reflection. I know there's even some cultures who celebrate the mistakes because there's tremendous learning that occurs in those mistakes. And if you have strong enough norms and you've built strong enough trust, an organization absolutely can be strong enough to push through those mistakes. But when those mistakes happen, you can't just pretend like they didn't happen and keep moving or quit or stop doing the work. There has to be some dialogue about what happened, who was harmed, what we could have done differently, what opportunities were missed. And unfortunately, organizations sometimes are so busy in the grind, they miss the value of the reflection space. So I'd say a big thing there is to pause and reflect on those mistakes and celebrate them, learn from them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. Couldn't agree more. I think so many of us are doing racial equity and racial justice and racial healing work without a harm and repair system, practice, agreements, structures in place, right? Like we are so afraid of committing harm that we avoid it, and it's impossible to do racial equity work without it. Like that is just going to happen. That is implicit in being in right relationship with ourselves and with one another, is the process of going through and understanding how to work through harm. And there could be so much magic in what the repair can actually birth, both for the individuals and the organization. But we don't structure the work that way, right? It takes a lot of time and a lot of expertise. I love Mia Mingus's work around transformative justice and accountability, right? I think every Project Nia and Miriam Kaba, Fumbling Towards Repair, that workbook is powerful in terms of really also supporting ourselves, equipping ourselves in understanding how to sustain the relationships through the harm and create the possibility of repair, because that's the only way towards transformation. And ultimately, that's what we want, right? And I think that in itself, right, should be central to both how we engage in love and are in community and create cultures with young people, and how we engage and create cultures with the organizations that are supporting young people, and even creating these same sort of systems and cultures in communities, right? We often talk about abolitionism, and oftentimes do not grasp or have a specific action to put something else in place, right? And I think the work of Marian Kaba and Project Nia, a lot of the abolitionist practitioners are saying we really need to get better at understanding how to implement harm and repair structures, collective community accountability systems, so that we could learn to sort of manage the process and journey so that we could all be transformed. That is how we create a radical reimagination. That's how we create new systems. That is how we truly understand the demands of being abolitionists within this work, right? And that, because we know that the systems that we're operating in and under are not meant to sustain and support and love students, communities of color. And so we have to reimagine and spend time at rebuilding them, and in part having that intentionality of embedding the practices of harm and repair are critical.
And Dom, if I can just give one technical example. Both the Network for College Success and NewRoot Learning Institute partner with the San Francisco Coalition of Essential Schools. We have borrowed one of the norms that they use, and the norm is go to the source or let it go. So different organizations set a different timeline. It's either 24 hours, 48. I've never seen more than 72 hours. Go to the source or let it go. So we hold individuals within the organizations accountable for when there has been harm. You have a responsibility to go to the source and have that conversation, or you've created the harm. You have a responsibility to go to the source. And sometimes the source is, I'm the source, even though I thought it could have been Rito. And if I spend a little time to reflect, oh, it's really some work I need to do with myself. So that's just one example of a technical piece that fits within this adaptive heart work that we're talking about.
Love it. Thank you all so much. Want to also thank, y'all are dropping some wisdom. We got a bunch of questions that are starting to jump in. I'm going to get to those in a minute. Please continue to submit those. One last from my end. You know, I've heard us talk a little bit about love and community, and just would love to just hear from both of you all. How do you find joy in this work? What gives you hope? And what do you think the importance of finding those moments are in the sustainability aspect?
I keep going first, Rito. Go ahead, my brother.
Yeah, I think if we do the work right, where we understand how to embrace the journey, how to be in right relationship with one another, how to create those conditions for harm and repair, if the organization is structured in that way in terms of its use of time and priorities, and the way that it creates systems and cultures of transformation and relationship versus productivity, right? I think you'll have joy, right? It's the systems that are currently designed that we continue to sort of operate and expect different outcomes from, that create disharmony and harm and make this work just joyless, loveless, right? And love is the greatest antidote to all of this, right? And so if we center love, if we center relationship, if we center repair, if we center radical reimagination, if we create organizations and conditions and structures around those things, then I think joy is more than possible, right? I remember walking into Rockwood Leadership Institute in Oakland, and everywhere I turned in their office, there were framed signs that said relationship before task. Everywhere you turn, bathroom, copy room, kitchen, foyer. And that's the culture that they were trying to create. It doesn't mean it was perfect, right? It doesn't mean there's a process to creating that that. It doesn't mean that there's a demand both on the individual, interpersonal, and the actual system. But I know that there was joy in that institution.
Two of my personal values as a leader is authenticity and joy and fun. And so for me, it is an act of self-love and loving others when folks can be their authentic selves. It brings me so much joy when I hear the brothers in our organization, for example, say they don't have to code switch within our organization. So it's important to me that people take space really to do the identity work, and that we welcome and honor the differences and the diversity of the community. That brings me joy. Also, though, this is, like we said, it's hard, heavy work. So we have to be intentional about fun and joy. Yeah. We use a Google space and other technical things. We use a Google space in our organization. Other organizations use Slack. We have a channel devoted just to joy. So staff post pictures of families. They post anecdotes of something that happened with a young person in a school. They post videos every day of things that just bring them joy, and then the community can come in and celebrate. We're intentional about holding space to celebrate within the office, and we create artifacts from those celebrations and we put them throughout the office to remind folks we try to have fun together. Sometimes we just got to stop and play and be silly, and it's equally as important to have some fun and lighten up.
Love it. Love
Tell some jokes. Go to a bar, hang out.
Thank you all. I want to start getting into some of these great questions that are coming in. Thank you for folks putting in these, and affirmations, just folks saying how much they appreciate what you've been sharing, and an early happy birthday to you, Rito, from Chris Payne. Got to call that out. So I want to start with this question. Sindel asks, these are great points about how to make an intention into action and ultimately impact. What can we do in spaces where people may resist committing to equity due to a perceived trade-off for the dominant group?
I expect resistance. What I will not tolerate is abuse. And so, Rito, you go behind me because you may not agree with everything that I'm saying here. This type of heart work, healing work, transformative work is going to make people uncomfortable. You're not doing a good job if people aren't comfortable, if people aren't pushing back and acting out. The trick is to stay the course, not push folks into a danger zone, but folks are going to be uncomfortable. And with that discomfort, there's going to be resistance. And so you have to sort of figure out how to push through the resistance. Do I need to stop and have a healing space? Do I need to keep pushing and let people feel on resistance? Like I tell my staff all the time, it's okay that you're frustrated. It's okay to be angry. I know. Okay, I can't. Okay, so we're frustrated. Let's talk about that. Doesn't mean we stop. Doesn't mean we fix it. However, on the flip side of that, I am personally done trying to convince people that this is the right work. I am personally done trying to change minds of people who just are not ready. And so we have to have conversations again with staff who aren't ready, and we have to be careful about who we're partnering with. I'm okay with the resistance as long as you're committed and you're going to stay with it. If it's resistance to the use of toxicity and abuse, then I'm letting go. This is not the space for us.
Yeah, that's the answer's in the question, right? The answer's in the question. And the question is, if there's resistance, perceived trade-offs, right? But the question says from the dominant group. You don't fucking do equity, racial justice, and racial healing work if there's a hierarchy and a dominant group. Why? The dominant group is already saying, we are the dominant group. Then everything else is just diversity. If the dominant groups is saying there's a trade-off, then it's transactional. You don't do it. Because the system that you are trying to do it in is not ready. The system that you are trying to do it with has a hierarchy and has a power structure and has a power dynamic that will preserve itself at all costs. And it will cause harm in preserving itself to those in Black bodies and brown bodies and in Indigenous bodies. And why would we want Black, brown, Indigenous bodies to be harmed? And so my answer is you don't do it. If there is a dominant group that is stating that there are trade-offs and they hold power, you don't do it. And so you're very clear. So you're very clear, oh, this is a transactional space and we're doing transactional work. Got it. This is not a transformative space. And so the clarity is critical for all of us. What types of systems are we in? And is the work that we are talking about possible? And if it isn't, then we should not be doing the work because, man, I am sick and tired of having leaders of color completely be grinded up, harmed, and carrying all this racialized trauma from the damn dominant group. That is not sustainable. And it's unjust. And so I think we have to really discern, right? Is this possible? Can we do racial justice, racial healing work, racial equity work within the systems that we're in? And are we willing to dismantle the hierarchy and enter into relationship and understand what that means for all of us collectively? So the answer is in the question.
Love that. Thank you both.
I guess you did agree with me, huh?
You know, Jackie, I think there's a question here that relates to something you said. I also want to know a little bit more of what for you indicates when to kind of turn up the heat, as you mentioned, with staff when cultivating equitable or anti-racist organization.
When I see complacency, if we take the time to define what white supremacy culture is and what that looks like, and we do some equity work and we're on an upward trajectory and we have some rough times, and then all of a sudden we kind of slide back into what's familiar. It's time to shake things up. I have a quick example. There continue to be, but there was a string of violence against Asian Americans. And someone on our staff, when we checked in at the beginning of the meeting, basically said, I'm not okay. And we went on with the meeting and followed the agenda as if the person didn't say that. That is a time for me as a leader. Wait a minute, what are we doing here? Is what we have on the agenda so important that we're not hearing someone in our community is not okay? We're not going to set this agenda aside and talk about that and take that up and see what we can do. Those are the types of moments where you've got to disrupt, when folks are a little bit too comfortable.
We do anything to add of things to look for?
Yeah, I think that was brilliant. Yeah, nothing to add to that. Stop, pause.
A couple questions I'm kind of trying to combine here, but you know, for folks that maybe don't have as much agency over the organization that they're working with, the system that they're working within, there's been times where you all worked in systems like that, right? And so what did you do to survive those spaces? And what suggestions did you have for others that are trying to lead in those spaces currently? Yeah, and I think the other piece is, what are some of the warning signs that you had to catch in yourself that you had to recognize when you saw those spaces causing harm to you?
I have learned, it's taken me a long time, that I can only control myself. I can influence others, I can disrupt, but I can only control myself. So in spaces where you may not have the formal leadership, you can still do your own work, and you can do things like take some steps, start a book club, find a partner who wants to start a book club on racial healing, start with a team that just wants to discuss the work. Have certain norms, equity-based norms for your particular team. I know firsthand, I've seen it happen over and over again, not just in our organization. The energy of love is more powerful than evil, hate, and fear. And so when you just take a few steps in that direction, that energy spreads. And I believe our ancestors guide us and help us and show us the path along the way. You're not going to know up front, but if you just take a couple steps, you'll know what to do, because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I seen some of the questions on here too. I wanted to kind of respond to Camille. Love you, Camille. Like, from the moment that oppression has existed, the human condition has created ways to survive and thrive and love. We all have resource. We all have resource. And so the moment we start thinking that Black and brown communities do not have the resource and what they need to survive, we have to question that in terms of how we are approaching this work. And two, I have never been in a system where I'm not trying to fuck with it. Right? Like, if I know it's not, if I know it's transactional, right, I'm going to try to create fugitive space, right? And fugitivity has been around as long as oppression has existed, right? And our communities are masterful at creating fugitive space to survive, creating fugitive space to have joy amidst the oppression, creating fugitive space to have opportunities to organize and to agitate, orchestrate around these systems of oppression, right? And so, there are a lot of educators who are doing that work, right? They are existing and doing work in fugitivity with one another by changing the curriculum or changing their approach or trying to do everything that they can to bring an alternative place, right? I think some of our students do it too, right? They'll show up to school and create their own fugitive space, create their own spaces to survive from the lack of engagement, right? And the invisibility and not being seen, and so they'll create their own spaces, and so I think we are absolutely creative beings, right? We will survive, and we have always survived, and we have the resources and everything that we need to reimagine our current conditions, both material and spiritual, and that, I think, it's powerful. Like, I don't ever want to lose hope, right? Like, it's impossible to lose hope if we know what our ancestors have survived, right? It's impossible to lose hope. And so I rather hold on to hope. I rather hold on to love. I rather hold on to moments and possibilities of fugitivity and abolitionism, and knowing that we are enough and that we have enough, even though the conditions could be harsh, right? And so I think that's the invitation, right? Like, is to approach it in that way, so that, yeah, maybe the systems aren't ready, but we could create subsystems or parallel systems, or use our reimagination to continue to thrive.
Love it. I think that is a beautiful invitation to end on. Just personally, just want to say to both of you, I've had the opportunity just to learn from both of you, experience your mentorship, your guidance, your friendship, your community has fundamentally changed who I am as a person and as a leader. So would like to just thank you for all that you do for all of us. Continue to do what you do. And what you do for the city and for young people in this city. So just thank you. Also, thank you for just joining us and sharing your brilliance, with everyone here today. Would like to also thank everybody who joined the call today. Again, we are about to open our post-panel discussion space. If there's anyone who think there's a lot to unpack, to share some of those reflections that folks may be thinking about, would love for you to join us. We just put the link in the chat. It's in a separate Zoom room, so feel free to hop over there. And again, just one more time, Rito, Jackie, thank you so much for sharing today.
Thank you.
Love you, Jackie.
Love you more, buddy. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Tom.
Yep.